It's all interconnected, north, south, east, and west. I am Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast, the week starting Sunday, September 29th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. If you have a comment or question, write it up down below. It helps the algorithm, and we're happy to answer any questions. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you may. Select the Super Thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. And with that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Elliot Harris, Our Predicament, Evolution Moto. These are all our longtime contributors. Thank you all very much. And then some new contributors, Victor Maki, Carlos Santiano Tabernilla, Dennis, and Clay Goose. Thank you all so much. With that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights across the entire planet because, well, of course, it's all interconnected, right? So we do see, actually, a gale, another in a series. I think it's a third in a series in the past week over the, we'll call it the central North Pacific with 22, 23-foot seas aimed somewhat Hawaii and at the U.S. West Coast and forecast to build. We also have a gale in the South Pacific with 26-foot seas, the second in a series in the past week, aimed off to the northeast. We also have tropical activity. This is this is Isaac up here with 60 knot winds pushing off to the northeast. Another system off of Europe getting ready to move inland, and another tropical system, Joyce, here with 35 knot winds, not doing a whole lot at the moment. And then we also look south of Australia, 22-foot seas aimed up in that direction with more to follow, and yet more activity under South Africa, 26-foot seas pushing to almost 28-foot, and then tropical activity off of Japan and in that area. So we went from basically nothing happening to, oh, and I should not forget, Hurricane Helene pushed into the panhandle of Florida just a day or so ago. We went from nothing to a lot of activity, all within the period of a week. Somehow, every ocean, north, south, east, and west, are talking to each other, and they know what's going on. But before we get into that, let's start with our usual buoy roundup. Current conditions, we're just looking in the Pacific in our local area, though a lot of this discussion is going to focus on a lot more than the Pacific. All right, we'll start by looking at the Point Reyes buoy, number 029, off of course, Point Reyes, California. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting the buoy all the way up from 33.3 second, really long period energy, which there is none, all the way down to pure wind chop, 5-second period energy. We see a little bump of something here at 20 seconds, but just slightly above a half of a foot. Most energy focused in the 9-second period band and little bits of remnant energy in the 11-second period. This from a swell that is fading and slowly being overtaken by local wind swell. We'll put all this together. We're looking at the primary swell, 7.3 feet, 9.3 seconds from 315 degrees. Surf calculated from that, about 6.7 feet. It's about a foot overhead, something like that. And then maybe some secondary swell, 2.6 feet at 12.3 seconds from about 290 degrees. That's the leftover energy from the swell that hit on Saturday. Then we go down to Southern California. We're using the Point Loma South buoy off of San Diego, buoy number 191, a good proxy for the whole Southern California area. Again, that same little indicator of half a foot at 20 seconds, and then that 12, 13-second period of energy, a little bit of the northwest swell from the Gulf of Alaska working its way through the Channel Islands into Southern California, but in general, surf pretty small. Primary swell, 2 feet at 13 seconds from 266 degrees, but that gets bent by the Channel Islands before it even hits the buoy, so that gives it's really more like probably about a 310-degree angle. Surf size, 2.6 feet, 2.5 feet, waist high, let's say. When we go to the south shore of Hawaii, we're going to use the Lanai buoy number 239 because it's protected from any wind swell. Again, that same little background pulse of energy, 0.6 feet at 20 seconds. Again, that wouldn't, that might be thigh-high surf something, but really nothing else after that. Put it all together, okay, 0.7 feet at 19.8 seconds from 208 degrees. That's 1.3 foot surf, okay? And yeah, it's actually maybe a little bit bigger than that. Then secondary swell, 1 feet at 12.5 seconds from about the same direction. Again, the same size, so not a whole lot happening there. But given that it's turning towards fall, we got to also take a look at the north shore of Oahu, the Waimea Bay buoy, number 106. We do have a bit of energy here in the 10 to 11 second period range. Nothing huge, but something rideable. Primary swell, 2.8 feet, 10.4 seconds from 285 degrees. Surf, 3 foot Hawaiian. So what it is chest high, shoulder high sets at select spots, and it is rideable. All right, so let's go back in time. We're going to, just like Wednesday night, the 25th of September, little gale here developed in the western Gulf of Alaska. Seas were 17.5 feet right there, the highest seas over this entire domain. There's their exact location. Max winds were 46 knots, again, at that same location, mainly aimed, 156 degrees, from 358 degrees. So almost due north winds. I think that is the swell that is currently hitting the north shore of Oahu. Just small background wind swell. Most of this energy was really aimed at the U.S. West Coast. We'll put this into motion. And you see as we got into Thursday, seas jumped to 21 feet and then 22 feet midday Thursday, and then up to about 25 feet off of Vancouver Island. Before moving inland, the swell you see actually had further to go to reach Hawaii than the U.S. West Coast. This swell hit, we can actually see it right there, pushing into, we'll say, San Francisco area on Saturday. Surf heights were, 2 foot overhead, something like that, maybe some bigger sets on the peak, and certainly rideable, and whatever swell from that is also hitting the Hawaiian Islands. Now, as we get into Sunday, another gale is developing north of the Hawaiian Islands. Same location, probably going to have the same effect. But we'll get into that in a minute. This is just the Hindcast, what has happened so far. Going along with the interconnected theme, off of New Zealand on Tuesday night, the 24th of September, a gale developed also with that's about 26 foot seas, building to 30 feet, building to about 31, maybe even 32 feet. That was on Wednesday morning, the 25th, lifting well off to the north. This other system, seas were high. It was falling southeast. Really no energy aimed off to the north. Swell from this system is pushing towards Hawaii, bound in the early part of the week and into central and southern California, let's say mid work week, maybe a little bit later in the week. And then that one faded out. Now, as we got into Saturday, another gale started developing, believe it or not, south of New Zealand. We had nothing for 2 months. And then all of a sudden, let's start producing gales, but not only in the southern hemi, as well as the northern hemi. And also let's start doing hurricanes in the Atlantic. I mean, it's amazing. It just went like someone flipped a switch and the cap just turned whatever was capping the production of storms, and they're all low pressure systems, and they all have to penetrate high up into the atmosphere. Whatever that cap was that was shutting down the chimney effect from happening, it appears to be gone at the moment. I'm not saying anything's raging or anything, but we are in a much better place than we were. So we get into Saturday, seas were nearly 30 feet, we'll say 29 feet, pushing off to the northeast, and let's get us right to about where we are today with 27-foot seas aimed to the northeast. So another southern hemi swell is on the way behind the one that's already in the water, poised to hit Hawaii and California. And then we go to the North Atlantic, which was basically dormant, nothing happening. But the models, and here's the other little interesting point, the models 2 weeks ago, before it actually formed, so this was on, let's say, Wednesday, the 25th of September, almost 2 weeks before it, the GFS model and the ECMWF model, the European model, both were saying something's going to happen here. And you looked at the satellite photos, you looked at everything, it was like clear blue sky, nothing even close. And then bam, all of a sudden, We got low pressure developing right off western Cuba between that and the Yucatan Peninsula, building, lifting fast north. I mean, the models projected it hitting somewhere in here 2 weeks out. It was really quite astounding. And you see here, seas 39 feet. Let's see, we got, it's about what it was, 39 feet before it moved onshore right here in the Big Bend area of the Panhandle of Florida on Thursday late afternoon. It was a Cat 4 storm, 140 mile per hour winds. At least that was the projections, and all the top modeling agencies and forecasters seem to suggest that was what actually happened. Keaton Beach, I think, suffered the worst of the damage. A very large storm surge. A lot of water moving through that area, a lot of devastation. Not good, of course, but what's really interesting is the quote-unquote explosive growth of this system. It went from basically a depression on Wednesday to Thursday evening, or Thursday afternoon, being a Cat 4 hurricane moving onshore. That used to never happen. It was an exceedingly rare thing to have what they claim is quote-unquote explosive growth. It seems to be a regular thing nowadays. I'm not trying to expound on why, but it definitely is happening. Anyway, so then we got into Friday. Another system started developing. This is Isaac here. You'll see it push off. Let's see, we'll get to Saturday. It's currently with 60 knot winds. It's pretty much fading out here, bound for Europe. Another system poised to impact Europe with 25-foot seas, and another system, Joyce here, with 35 knot winds, but we'll see what that's going to do. Probably not a whole lot. All this in terms of direct impact on the U.S. East Coast, probably not a whole lot, but that doesn't mean there isn't going to be surf, because there is definitely some weather planned for that area as well. Then we go back over the past week. We're going to start, we'll say Monday, the 23rd of September, just looking at what's going on relative to South Africa. Yeah, first a little gale with 26-foot seas passed south of there. Another one produced 28-foot seas, but not a whole lot. I mean, this is a much quieter pattern than what's been going on. But here we are Sunday, and boom, here we go. Another broad system directly impacting the coast with 27, almost 28-foot seas. Probably pretty windy, pretty messy, but we'll get into that in the forecast. And then finally, the Indian Ocean. We're going back a week again, Sunday, September 22nd. A kind of a moderate pattern. Not a whole lot happened this past week in terms of producing giant surf, but enough to produce surf. See, we went through the whole week and didn't really see anything with even 26-foot seas, but there was some activity. Not surprising that things are winding down a bit. It's getting late in the season. At some point, we're going to focus entirely, that would be on the Northern Hemisphere, North Pacific, North Atlantic, and we'll only address the Southern Oceans on an exception basis. But for now, there's activity both north and south, and there's been nothing for quite a while in the north. We'll take it all in for now. So what's coming for the future? We're going to focus on the North Pacific for a little bit here. We're going to start by looking at Jetstream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When those gales form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet to the south. Right there, we see one. We see another little one right there. We see yet another one here. But mainly, I think it is this area right in here. It's the main focus. I mean, the jet's almost split over between Japan and the Kuril Islands, but comes together right here on about the date line. This would probably be the most likely area supportive of gale development. And then there is a good fetch, or it's not a fetch, it's an upper level push, and that is a trough. Anyway, these troughs, what they do is they help create a counterclockwise flow aloft and also down at the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure. And of course, low pressure gets traction on the ocean surface. If it's strong enough, imparts energy to the ocean, creating seas. Those seas eventually start radiating away from the fetch area. The lesser period elements get groomed out, exposing groundswell. And that swell, of course, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we have a little bit of potential here on the date line. It looks like a little something up in the northern Gulf, but probably too close to land to be of much interest. Sure enough, by even right about now, that trough in the Gulf is gone, while the trough on the dateline builds, continuing. In fact, winds pretty good spilling into it, but there's kind of this break right in here. That's not great for gale development. But then as you get into Monday and Tuesday, you see wind energy picking up to 170 knots. That probably favors wind development more in the southeast quadrant of the storm, aimed up in this area, than down towards here or certainly at Hawaii. So we'll have to dive into the models to take a look at that. Anyway, we've moved out into Wednesday. You see the jet then ridging hard to the north. When you get that ridging pattern, you get a clockwise flow. You can see it right there. That's the hallmark of high pressure. It does nothing to create meaningful groundswell development. But you do see the sense of some sort of a trough trying to start build in the northwestern Gulf on Wednesday into Thursday. It gets kind of pinched off on Friday and then pushes into the, we'll call it British Columbia. But then yet another trough builds behind that. Not super great for producing storms or anything. Again, that focus where it starts pushing off to the northeast, focusing more likely on the southeast quadrant of whatever low pressure system develops there. And there we are, 180 hours out, a week and a day out. But you see the whole jet basically focused on the 45 north latitude line, slowly falling south as the seasons change, and looking to offer more opportunity in the future. North Pacific coming online, South Pacific still doing a little something, but is it over or not? Right, so let's go down to the surface. Surface level pressure, surface level winds in the North Pacific. California here, Hawaii down here, Japan off here. You see tropical systems off Japan. I'm not even going to go there. I am focusing on this guy right here, the latest gale. 40 to almost 45 knot north winds targeting Hawaii right about this time, and also a bit at the U.S. West Coast. This system starts lifting north with 45 knot winds aimed probably more southeast than south at Hawaii. This would be on Sunday evening and into Monday morning. Broad fetch of 45 knot winds aimed over this entire area and building while lifting north on Monday with then 55. There might even be 60 knot winds in this area. Now that's really focusing on, we'll say, the Pacific Northwest up into British Columbia and central Canada. Less so down into central California, but continuing to circulate there. I mean, still this broad fetch of 45 knot winds, even into Tuesday morning, the 1st of October, suggesting when you get this much fetch, there is sideband energy that'll radiate out. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays off. But again, you have Point Reyes here. That really shadows a lot, from I'll call it Point Reyes southward. It shadows a lot of swell. Really, 319 degrees is the cutoff relative to San Francisco, which is somewhere right up along in here. In fact, we'll just pull this back. You see there's bits of fetch, but most of the fetch is east of the cutoff line. So, well, again, it's kind of a nail biter to see how much swell will actually resort north of Point Conception. We pull this out to Thursday, another gale forecast. In fact, let's go back and look at this. This little tropical system here. I didn't even research to see what the name of it was, but notice this. It pushes north, gets caught by the jet stream, supercharges. Unfortunately, it's too far north. It's up in the Bering Sea. If this guy was down in here, south of the Aleutian Islands, we would definitely be in business. Anyway, remnants of that, I'll call it an extratropical storm if it does what it's supposed to. By Saturday, are supposed to start drooping south of the Aleutian Islands, producing 30 to 35 knot winds. I mean, that's good for maybe 12 or 13 second period swell, targeting Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. But it's a week off. Hey, the models did pretty good on Helene 2 weeks out, but we know how this goes. Week out, a lot can change. Might not happen at all. Might be something else. We'll see. All right, what are the effect of those winds on the ocean surface? Here we are at 12Z run of the model on Sunday, 29th of September. Gale north of Hawaii producing 22, almost 23-foot seas aimed at the islands. Yeah, definitely 23-foot seas. Now, this portion of the gale here, you can see the little arrows. They're all aimed northeast. It is this guy here targeting Hawaii. And then the U.S. West Coast, 26-foot seas, quickly building to 29 feet Monday morning. But again, kind of kind of a mix of, you see the angle going like this. So we'll see how much actually gets down into California. Then it really starts building as we get into later Monday with 44-foot seas. The cutoff is like right over in the hair edge of this guy where there's 38-foot seas. So some of that aimed at Central California, but most of it you see as you get into late Monday night, really just targeting Canada, maybe down to Vancouver Island, something like that, and then moving on inland. After that, a bit, there's our extratropical, supposedly forecast storm in the Bering Sea, all landlocked, of course, so no swell resulting. But whatever fetch does seep south is to start generating, there we go, 22-foot seas on Sunday night a week from now. That's nothing huge, but you get the sense there is some sort of a little swell front. So maybe some background energy. I wouldn't count too much on size, but something rideable for exposed north-facing breaks to the Hawaiian Islands and into California. And then looking south, here is our gale currently with 27-foot seas off, and there's New Zealand, aimed to the northeast. This, of course, targeting Tahiti and Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. Not a huge system, sort of like the one before it. Tiny little system, but producing something. Whoops, actually, whoa, look at that. This is better than earlier runs of the model I saw. 27-foot seas holding into, that's Sunday evening. Now that's about right. And then lifting well off to the north. So not too bad. Looks promising. The question is going to be, by the time that swell hits into California, what's going to be happening with the North Pacific? Will that swell bury the southern hemiswell? What will be happening with local wind swell, blah, blah. Complex situation. Theoretically, you could have southern hemiswell, Gulf of Alaska swell, and local wind swell all converging at the same time. Now, as we get into Thursday, a stronger gale with 38-foot seas is forecast developing southeast of New Zealand, pushing off to the east and northeast, still with 37-foot seas into Thursday night, and then starting to lift pretty decently northeast as we get into Friday, the 4th of October, still with 33-foot seas, then fading from there, but still 28-foot seas continuing into almost Sunday. Whoops, sorry, I went too far. Oh, no, into Sunday, and then it just fades out. So we'll see. It's a bit out, but if it happens, there could definitely be some surf. Now, this would probably more target, well, certainly, Chile, Peru, Central America, Mexico, and up into Southern California, and even Northern California. But it's 5-6 days out till that really gets organized. Something to keep our eyes on. The North Atlantic focus for now certainly seems to be Ireland, England, Basque Country, Spain, that area. You can see two systems in a row, not huge, not in terms, by winter standards, but still some seas pushing some energy in that direction. Another tropical system, now this is interesting, doesn't have a name yet. I think it's just a tropical depression. Was it number 10 or number 11, something like that? Forecast lifting north, building with seas to 44 feet. This would be on Friday, the 4th of October, to 47 feet. How high do we go? 50 feet. Can we get any higher? 52 feet, 54 feet, 53 feet. That was about it. And then fading from there. Now notice almost all this energy is aimed off in this direction, but I think that it's reasonable that if you really get 50-foot plus seas, it's reasonable that you could get some background long period energy all along the U.S. East Coast up into Canada, for sure. So something to keep an eye on, and it also suggests again that the cap, whatever was shutting down storm production, that is starting to turn, probably given just, if nothing else, momentum from the change of seasons, but maybe something better. South Atlantic, real quickly, yes, South Africa scheduled to be pummeled, if not right now, within the next 12 hours. Another system falling south, not doing anything. Another area of 28-foot seas, probably better positioned to produce more of a groom swell into South Africa. That'd be like on Wednesday. And then after that, things settle down a bit. Let's see if there's anything more lingering here. No, and that's it. And then the Indian Ocean. Right now, there's the system under Africa. It starts fading out. Another system starts developing with 30-foot seas aimed pretty well off to the north, probably targeting Bali in that area. But also look at Western Australia. And here we go with 34-foot seas going to 36 feet. Yeah, and 38 feet just barely off of Perth, that area. Raw, large, probably destructive kind of swell, not great for surfing. Pushing directly into the coast theoretically on Wednesday, that would be October 2nd GMT time. And then let's see what happens after that. Another system forecast, better positioned to just produce surf relative to the Mentawais, Bali area, and Western Australia with 34-foot seas building into the 35 and 36-foot range. And then we'll see where that goes. Again, the qualifier, it's a week out, so no guarantees there. So we talked about wind swell or potential for wind swell. So we're going to look at local winds. California here, that's Point Conception, Southern California down here, San Francisco Bay Area, Cape Mendocino up there, the Hawaiian Islands. Right now, high pressure in control, producing a gradient, north winds, north to northwest, 20 to 25 knots, along Cape Mendocino, generating wind swell, also mixing with the fading remnants of swell that hit on Saturday. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. As we get into Monday, gradient builds off of Northern California, 30-knot north winds, generating more wind swell. We see our gale low building in the northern Gulf. Trades pretty light, 10 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. To get into Tuesday, gradient fades some, still producing 25-knot north winds. Let's just go back here real quick. There's 55, 60-knot winds buried right in there, and the cutoff is somewhere right about here relative to Northern California. So theoretically, 50 to 55-knot fetch aimed at California for what, maybe 6 to 9 hours, something like that. Okay, anyway, let's go into Tuesday. Gradient starts fading, light local wind pattern for most of California. The wind swell still being generated by the gradient. Trades light, 10 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Wednesday, gradient fires up again, 25 to 30 knot north winds, pushing down the coast, but a light local wind pattern for most of Central California. Trades light for the Hawaiian Islands. Thursday, the gradient finally completely starts fading out for Cape Mendocino. Light northwest wind pattern for California. Trades 10 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. It's classic autumn. No wind at all for California on Friday. Trades northeast, 10 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Saturday, same sort of deal. Really nothing happened. Let's get ourselves into Sunday. Some sort of northwest wind pattern, but if it's all focused on Point Conception, you don't get really any wind swell from it. The best spot is when the gradient's more up here relative to California. Trades light for the Hawaiian Islands, and there we go. We're 180 hours out. And just for fun, the precip forecast for California, we're just looking for potential for snow. You can see the whites. That's where there is potential for snow. There is the Canadian-U.S. border right there. We see snow up into central, I will say northern British Columbia, and maybe snow down as far south as Whistler on Tuesday. High and dry for California. Doesn't make it not even 1 mile south of the border. Another little pulse as we get into Wednesday of snow up there. Doesn't make it south of the border. Let's keep going. Here comes the next system. And two, it produces some snow, but doesn't make it south of the border. Doesn't even make it to the border on Saturday. And I think that's about it. We're 180 hours out. This is not atypical. That said, I would say the change of season is starting later than normal. I mean, from a swell production standpoint, late August, early September, you'd see something right now. We're practically the beginning of October, and it feels like it is the end of August. This is pretty typical of a La Nina pattern. We're going to talk about that a bit more in a moment, but just keep that in the back of your mind. And then finally, the hikers forecast, backpackers forecast, temperatures for the Pacific intersection of the Pacific Crest Trail and Tioga Pass Road in Yosemite, up at about 8,700 feet. These are temperatures all the way from 500 feet up to about 14,000 feet. The red line is the freeze line, 32 degrees. You see freezing at 12,500 feet. And that's not even till next weekend. Generally, temperatures, what is that, 55 to 60 degrees? Again, this theme of this is what you'd see in like early September, not the beginning of October. Those temperatures holding till Saturday, the 5th of October, and then starting to fall a little bit. But I mean, it's 45 to 50 degrees and then building back to 55 degrees. I mean, again, it seems like the seasons are displaced at least 6 weeks, if not 8 weeks. The sense of a base La Nina pattern still in control of the atmosphere. All right, surf spot forecast, real quick. Here's our mixture of wind swell. Where are we? Sunday here. This would be the 29th of September. Surf heights in the 6 to 7 foot range. As we get into Monday, swell or surf heights fade down to 3 feet on late Tuesday and early Wednesday. Then the next swell from the northern Gulf of Alaska arrives. Surf heights theoretically up to 8 feet, and then dribbling down as we get into the weekend. Let's look at actual swell heights. Well, 7 feet at 10 seconds on Monday, fading. Then the next pulse, 6 feet at 12 to 13 seconds sort of thing from, and probably a lot more northerly angle than this is suggesting, more like 310 degrees. We go to Southern California, you see not a whole lot in terms of surf size, 1 to maybe 2 feet sort of thing, but we know there is some southern hemi swell forecast. You can see it showing up here. This suggests late Thursday in the 1 foot range at 16 seconds. I mean, I've done some deeper digging. I think would not be surprised to see 1.5 feet at about 15 to 16 seconds somewhere on later Thursday into Friday. So some small southern hemi swell from that first little gale that was off of New Zealand, with what we know is at least 1 more, if not 2 more southern hemi swells coming. South shore of Oahu, 3 foot surf as we get into Tuesday from southern hemi swell from the first of the 2 New Zealand gales. And then potentially something more behind. What's this, 4 feet? I bet you that's wind swell. Let's take a look. Okay, first swell, here we go. 2 feet at 16 seconds on Monday into Tuesday, fading down, and then, oh, no, sure enough, this is the second swell arriving, building to I'm looking around the microphone here, 2.8 feet at 16 seconds, and that would be next weekend. So certainly something to be looking forward to. And note, that swell will also probably be working into California as well. And then the north shore of Oahu, not to be left out of the picture, surf heights in the almost 4 foot range as we get into Tuesday from the gale that's currently passing north of the islands. And then continuing surf heights, not huge, but certainly some rideable surf the whole way through the work week. Let's take a look into the weekend. Surf heights 3 feet at 12 seconds sort of thing into Tuesday, and then continuing in the 2.5 feet at 10-second range, building then again to 3 feet at 11 to 12 seconds as we get into next weekend. U.S. East Coast, Cocoa Beach, looking at surf heights really small initially, but slowly coming up, building up into the maybe 4 foot range as we get into next Sunday. Winds picking up a bit out of the east to 20, 30, even 30 knots. Let's go look at surf heights. Well, 1 feet at 8 to 9 seconds, building to 1.5 at 10 seconds. I mean, that would make rideable surf at the beaches in Cocoa Beach. And then raw wind swell, we'll call it, but 6 or 7 feet at 6 seconds sort of thing. Definitely rideable surf on the forecast. Going up to the Outer Banks, Cape Hatteras, the lighthouse, same sort of deal, building swell with building winds, surf heights up to 5 feet, peaking somewhere around Thursday, slowly working down from there, but then showing signs of coming back up. You get this north wind at 20 knots, and northeast 18 knots, so that's probably a local wind swell. And then again, more of the 20-knot northeast sort of winds, classic fall kind of pattern. Swell heights in the 6 feet at 8 to 9 second period on Thursday, and then coming up again. Oh, look at this, 2 to 3 feet at 16 seconds from the southeast. This is that long period swell from that forecast strong typhoon way out, or hurricane out in the middle of the North Atlantic. If it forms, something to definitely be looking towards. We'll do 2 more of these real quick. It's Jeffreys Bay, broad, raw storm surf 40 feet theoretically, winds out of the west at 35 knots. And that's now fading as we get into the middle of the week. Then a much more moderate surf pattern with surf heights in the 10 to 12 foot range, something like that. There you go, 27 feet at 14 seconds Monday morning, fading from there, then coming back up 10 feet at 13 seconds as we get into Friday. That might be pretty interesting. More surf for there. It isn't over just yet. And Bali gets the consistency record again. 7-foot surf building to 9 feet, theoretically building to 14 feet as we get into next weekend. Seems like a bit of a reach, but let's see. We got 5 feet at 14 seconds, 6 feet at 14 seconds, 9 feet at 15 seconds, all from the south, 206 degrees. Certainly, if you live there or you're on have booked a late season trip, you might be scoring. Right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with our atmosphere? We've talked about this interconnected thing, and that's going to be the first part of this discussion. But then after that, we're going to talk about our two other major weather oscillations, the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It is sort of like El Nino, La Nina, in that it has two phases, a warm phase and a cold phase, or really more specifically, a high pressure phase and a low pressure phase. It is confined to the North Pacific, north of the 20 north latitude line, and really focuses more on the, I guess it'd be the Northeast Pacific, off of Oregon, Washington, British Columbia. And it was really I think it was mainly created to help understand the difference in why there would be such extremes over long periods of time in the catch of salmon off the coasts there. Okay, and what they came to realize is, and this is just it's an index, and we'll get into a little bit more of it here, but you see there are warm phases, like from 1920 into about 1945. So that's 25 years. Then 25 years or more of that, 1945 to about 1975. So 30 years of a cold phase. Another warm phase that started, I think it was in 78 and went to about really cut off here in 98. So that's 20 years. And currently we're in a cold phase. Now notice this cuts off before we even get to 2020. And I can't show you the most recent data because the website is down. But we've seen it, we've talked about it. We've been in a cold phase since 98, and that continues to this point in time. We are anxiously and hopefully waiting for a switch from the cold phase to the warm phase, because what this actually acts like when you go into these warm phases, these prolonged warm phases, is it supports the formation of El Nino, and the cold phases support the formation of La Nina. Or you have prolonged lower than normal pressure in the North Pacific, which supports storm production in the Gulf of Alaska, versus prolonged areas of higher than normal pressure in the North Pacific, which basically hinders the formation of winter storms in the Gulf of Alaska. Currently, we are in one of those prolonged high pressure periods. Here is a graphic of what the PDO looks like, at least in what they call the warm phase, which is the El Nino-like phase. What you end up with is lower than normal pressure, and this is not for a day, a week. This is months upon months upon months. Even so, if El Nino runs for, like, we'll say a whole year, this is 10 or 15 years of like an El Nino pattern with low pressure after low pressure after low pressure pushing through the North Pacific, north of the 20-degree line. And what you end up with is, as low pressure circulates counterclockwise, it draws up warm, moist air from the tropics and creates warmer than normal temperatures all up along here. Now, I'm not a fisherman, and I don't know whether that's good for salmon fishing or not, but it either hinders or helps the salmon fishing over a decade period of time. As surfers, you know that when you get this sort of situation, you don't need a 5 mil suit in San Francisco anymore. You can squeeze by on maybe a 4.3 for extended periods of time. And in Southern California, people are writing and posting on the website, it's freezing down here in San Diego, and it's like September. And it's like, I get it. I understand. I know you're cold down there. It's even colder up here. Actually, I mean, it's not too bad in San Francisco right now, but not for a day or a couple of days here or there, a couple of weeks. We're talking for weeks, months, and years. This is what they call the warm phase of the PDO. This is what was in play prior to 1998. So here are those two phases. Here is, they call it the positive phase. I call it the warm phase. It is the low pressure phase. Again, you see literally the circulation of, and this is just on average over a period of years, low pressure consistently in the Gulf of Alaska and the North Pacific, drawing up warm air. What that also does is set up weaker than the normal trades over the equatorial East Pacific, which mimics like a weak long-term El Nino kind of pattern. And of course, we all know El Nino is good for swell and storm production, mainly because if you're in this warm phase of the PDO, you have a perpetual low pressure system in the Gulf of Alaska. What the phase that we're currently in here, though, is the exact opposite. They call it the negative phase, the high pressure phase, the cold phase. So basically what that means is you have high pressure in the Gulf of Alaska and North Pacific circulating clockwise like this. You end up with persistent northwest winds raking down the coast. That creates upwelling. My guess is that's good for fishing because it pulls rich, nutrient-rich waters up from the depths of the ocean, feeding the fish. The fish love it, and they all, are happy. I think the crabs do well. But again, I'm not a fisherman, so I'm not going to claim to be any sort of an expert on that. But from a surfing perspective, if you have average higher than normal pressure in the North Pacific, that does not do well for storm production. It acts like a cap on storm development. Hint, hint. If it sounds at all like what we've been going through anytime recently, but honestly, I would say from about 2004 or 5 onwards, there's just been this sense that yes, we've had El Ninos, we've even had super El Ninos, but in the gaps in between, it's been high and dry in terms of surf production, not very consistent, hard to get anything good. The storms that do form don't last as long, and it's just kind of a hit or miss situation. That's currently where we are today. And I mentioned that specifically in regards to this last El Nino. We said, God, the last El Nino was supposed to be hyped. It was supposed to be like strong, bordering on super strong. And in reality, what we saw was, it was a pretty, the start of the El Nino, which actually happened the winter before when we had wave after wave of the active phase of the MJO producing all that weather and rain pushing into California. That was the start of it. And the start of it looked great. The legs of the storm, the foundation of the development of El Nino looked wonderful. But then when it came time for it to happen last winter, it just didn't happen. And that's borne out here in the multivariable ENSO index. We've been looking at just sea surface temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region, but didn't sort of put the whole package together. The multivariable ENSO index looks at sea surface temperatures, pressure, wind direction, all that stuff, mashes it together, and also factors in for a warming planet and warming oceans. And here was our big El Nino for last year as compared to the El Nino of 2015, 2016, as compared to the super El Nino of 97, 98, and the other super El Nino in 82, 83. All these happened during the warm phase of the PDO when low pressure was locked over the North Pacific. From that point on, we have had high pressure, the inactive phase, the cool phase of the PDO over the Pacific. And you can see, we had one big spike here in 2015, but it certainly just carved the heck out of our El Nino for last winter. And that is still what is affecting, I think, our southern hemi summer activity. The short of it, and you can see here, La Nina, La Nina, La Nina. There's our 3-year La Nina here. The preponderance of La Nina and the relative sparsity of El Nino, not to say there aren't peaks and moments, but on average, the two waves are not supporting each other. That is, the low pressure waves of El Ninos, when they do form, are running into base high pressure in the Pacific, not allowing the El Nino to reach its full potential. The waves are out of sync with one another, whereas prior to 98, during the warm phase of the PDO, the low pressure phase of the PDO, you had a base low pressure state over the whole Pacific Ocean, both north and south, so that when you got El Nino, the El Nino goes and goes, oh wow, there's already low pressure here. It just sucks up the energy and goes to town and can overperform what it normally would have done. Whereas El Ninos that develop during a high pressure base state, the cold phase of the PDO, the high pressure phase of the PDO, then in turn underperform, and what overperforms is the La Nina base state and the development of high pressure, which does nothing for surfing, does nothing for skiing, unless you're pretty much in we'll say Oregon or somewhere north of there. It shifts the jet stream to the north in the North Pacific, whereas the PDO in the warm phase pulls the jet stream further south, and it can slam right into Southern California. We're not seeing that right now. Some official words on the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. The PDO is detected as warm or cool surface waters in the Pacific Ocean, north of 20 north. Over the past century, the amplitude of this climate pattern has varied irregularly at interannual to interdecadal time scales, meaning time periods of a few years to as much as time periods of multiple decades. We saw from our previous charts, it's pretty obvious. It's on for 20 or 25 years, it's off for 20 or 25 years, with little perturbations in between. The Pacific Decadal Oscillation Index is the leading empirical orthogonal function of monthly sea surface temperature anomalies over the North Pacific, poleward north of 20 north, after the global average sea surface temperature has been removed. Just short of it, basically what it's saying is you either have warmer than normal temperatures or cooler than normal temperatures in the North Pacific. But that absolutely equates to, if you have cooler than normal temperatures, that's because you have lower than normal pressure, because you have more upwelling because of storm development. If you get higher normal temperatures in the North Pacific, that's because you have high pressure sitting over the North Pacific. High pressure just basically cuts out all the winds except out around its edges, and then the water just sits there and bakes and bakes and bakes, but high pressure, again, doesn't support low pressure winter storm development. And then here's one more chart. The equator's like down here, so it's a little bit of an angle. But there's an atmospheric bridge they talk about, okay? If you have this persistent warmer than normal water in the over the equator, it creates deep convection that supports what they call an atmospheric bridge that feeds down into a deepening Aleutian low pressure. And then there's a feedback loop associated with that. Temperature, winds, moisture, cloud changes, in this case, stronger storms in the Gulf of Alaska supported by a warming a permanent or a semi-permanent, a tendency towards warmer temperatures on the equator in the Nino 3.4 region, elsewhere all the way to Ecuador. So there is this teleconnection between what's going on in the equator up in the North Pacific, and it also goes the exact opposite way. If you have high pressure in the North Pacific, it creates a feedback loop and sort of shuts down what's going on with the equator and hinders the development of El Ninos. And what happens in the North Pacific is not limited to the North Pacific. El Nino affects the whole planet, right? North and south, South Pacific, South Atlantic, Indian Ocean. More so, the main effects are in the Pacific Basin, but it definitely affects the development of hurricanes in the Atlantics, the development of winter storms pushing into Europe, and that in turn also feeds the development or hinders the development of storms in the Indian Ocean. So the title of the video, it's all interconnected. Literally it is. No ocean, no location is an island unto itself. All of this is part of a large interconnected system that has feedback loops amongst itself and that supports at a global level general trends. And even at a smaller level, now this is kind of a reach, I'll admit that, but this cap on storm production that we've kind of been through for the past 2 months, and then all of a sudden it breaks, there is some connection there. I'd say it's probably more seasonal, supported by this little bit of this trend. We're moving from what was a weak El Nino to a La Nina. The forecasts were for raging hurricanes in the Atlantic, and it never happened. Well, that's because the base of those forecasts suggested, clearly there was warmer than normal temperatures in the Atlantic, but it also thought that La Nina would develop stronger and quicker than forecast, and it didn't. At this point in time, La Nina really is not doing anything. And if we have enough time here, we'll get into some of that. But right now, we're just starting to make the shift from neutral into maybe the weakest and weakest of La Ninas in the atmosphere. All that overlaid on this foundational base PDO state that's focused or biased towards high pressure. So the whole planet's kind of in a weak La Nina mode, but not really strong one way or the other. So with that, we're going to do the quickest of quickest looks at our current situation with the MJO and La Nina, starting with zonal wind anomalies. Okay, we're looking for the active phase of the MJO. The MJO has two phases, active and inactive phase. The active phase is our friend. It's like low pressure setting up over the Pacific. When you get that, you get westerly anomalies over the Pacific. When you have the inactive phase, you get high pressure. So this is zonal wind anomalies. Our wind's stronger out of the east or stronger out of the west than normal. This is past performance here. This is the whole planet. The date line runs right up the middle here. The blues are easterly anomalies. They are typically associated with the inactive phase of the MJO, like a short-running La Nina. You can see that's been the case pretty much all the month of September. Here we are, September 29th, the forecast. Easterly anomalies continuing, little pockets of westerly anomalies, but the base state appears to be towards a inactive phase of the MJO for the next 2 weeks. Outgoing long-wave radiation forecast, it's just fancy words for cloud cover. If you have more clouds, one would assume that's the active phase of the MJO. This is the Pacific here, South America, Central America, New Guinea here, the dateline here, the equator here. This forecast goes out 2 weeks. The oranges mean cloud-free skies. That would be the inactive phase of the MJO. And you see that here per the statistical model today, 5 days from now. But then the model suggests neutral conditions going out 2 weeks from now. The dynamic model basically suggesting the same thing. Phase diagrams for the same two models, statistical and the statistic and dynamic model. MJO moves from east to west, pretty much organizes in the Indian Ocean, moves over the maritime continents like Bali, to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, over Africa, kind of peters out there and then reorganizes again in the Indian Ocean. Where the heavy dot is where the active phase is right now. Our friend, unfortunately, it's over Africa. And the closer the dot is to this circle, the weaker it is, so very weak. The forecast has it moving to the East Indian Ocean 2 weeks from now, and exceedingly weak per the statistic model. Dynamic model, a little bit more aggressive, suggesting it moving to the maritime continent, like, somewhere around Bali, something like that, but still really weak 2 weeks from now. I'm moving kind of fast here because there is one chart I want to see before we wrap things up. But anyway, this goes out 40 days, same thing, inactive phase forecast. South America there, New Guinea there, the equator there, dateline running right the middle. Outgoing long wave radiation, orange is dry skies. Greens are wet air, the active phase of the MJO. This suggests active phase of the MJO, maybe setting up about mid-October, making its way across the Pacific. So that would be a good window to start looking for maybe real surf getting organized. And then next up, the CFS model going out 3 months. This is past performance down here. This is the forecast here. Here's the first part of really interesting information. Again, this is the east-west component of the winds. The blues, easterly anomalies, inactive phase of the MJO. This is the whole planet. Dateline runs right up the middle. Far West Pacific starts about 125 east, so here. So our real area of interest is from here over to about here, the West Pacific. You see blues forecast. In fact, I'll just overlay it. I'll just save you the hassle here. The dotted contour, inactive phase of the MJO forecast, pretty much starting now into about October 23rd. But then after that, notice the easterly anomalies. Let's take this away. The easterly anomalies all but dissipate. And the active phase of the MJO sets up as we get into late October and then deeper as we get into November, with westerly anomalies taking over. But even after that, notice these easterly anomalies that have been really prevalent and are associated with La Nina. As you get into the depths of winter, theoretically are supposed to fade out. Now, I'm not taking that to the bank. I'm not believing it's 100% true, but even as this inactive phase is forecast in December, westerly anomalies are to persist. This is very interesting. Then you overlay the low pass filter here. This tells a little bit more of the story. No different than what we showed last week. Low pressure bias here over the maritime continent. This is the El Nino indicator. With the high pressure bias, tried to set up over the date line. It died back in August and isn't forecast to show up until again in like the 17th of October. But then just the weakest of weak signs of it and almost fading as you get into December. If this is La Nina, it certainly is a weak La Nina. Then we look in the ocean, sea surface temperature anomalies. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. From the TAO data buoy array, these are the anchor lines on the buoys. You see the sensors. Temperatures, yeah, all the warm waters in the west, not so warm in the east, a very shallow warm water layer. Sea surface temperature anomalies, according to this, now notice there's a big gap of dead data here. Warmer waters in the west, some warmer waters in the east, but the deep cool pool that was here is gone according to this array. I don't know that I believe that. Let's go look at another source. Here is the same picture, but using satellite data to try to support it. The interesting part about that, yes, we have much warmer water in the West Pacific going down deep. The cool pool, which was, it's up here, was down here, looks like it's pushing off up the thermocline. Yeah, not unexpected. Classic La Nina kind of pattern. But what you get is this building warm pool here. Almost makes you wonder, the normal path is down this way, but if warm water is blocking it, would this be the last pulse of La Nina for this year? Especially based what we saw in the other data that suggests La Nina, and the warm westerly anomalies starting to set up over the Pacific a month out or so. Let's dig a little deeper on that. Upper ocean heat anomalies for the past year. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. These are our El Nino generated Kelvin waves, warm water moving from the West Pacific to the East Pacific. Then here's the beginning of La Nina in almost, we'll call it December of last year. First wave of cold water pushing across. Here's the main first push, but 1, 2, 3 pushes embedded with that. A bit of a break here in June. In July, another push, and then a break in August. And then here is our next push, still very cold. The question is there more coming behind it? But before we get into answering that question, what's going on in the atmosphere? Again, it's like, well, we're sort of in La Nina, but it doesn't really seem like it. We look at the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin and Australia. That's sea surface pressure in Darwin, sea surface temperature in Tahiti. If pressure, Tahiti in the Pacific, if pressure is lower in Tahiti, again, this speaks to this, what's the average pressure over weeks and months in the Pacific as compared to other places in the planet? Is that low pressure bias thing showing up in the Pacific? Or is the high pressure bias that would typically be associated with La Nina in the Pacific? Well, the daily contribution is 2.26. That's nothing. I mean, it's not till you get like plus or minus 10 that you're really on a trend somewhere. And just looking back here, well, it's been all over the place. 30-day average takes some of the noise out of that. Here, we'll slide this over so you can see it. The current value, 0.86, dead neutral. Where have we been? Well, the MJO swings this thing in 20-day cycles one way or the other. Generally, it's been warmer or higher pressure, but not a whole lot. The 90-day average, today's value, minus 0.15, as neutral as you can get. And where has it been for the last month? Dead neutral. In fact, let's go look at a graph. Here's a 30-day running average of the Southern Oscillation Index. Neutral is between +7 and -7. Where have we been since April of 2023? Even during our big El Nino, we only made small spikes downward. And now, I can't really say there's a trend line going either up or down at this point. Yeah, we had a little spike up, but now we're heading down again. Theoretically, we're supposed to be moving into La Nina. Let's go look at ocean temperatures real quick. Sea surface temperatures for the equator in the Pacific. Ecuador here, that's the equator. New Guinea there, dateline out here. Blues, lower than normal temperatures. I mean, last week and the week before, we had a building area of cooling waters here. It looked like the first real hint of La Nina, even in the atmosphere. I mean, in the ocean, much less the atmosphere. But now it doesn't even look like that. We just have a little bit of cooler than normal waters here south of Hawaii, but not large, and they're not stable. And they haven't been there super strong for very long. The atmosphere to respond to the ocean needs to have a pattern in the ocean lasting for months and months before it even starts to respond. And then the atmosphere takes 3 months to spin up from that. I'm not seeing it there. And you look at the trend for the past 7 days, warming temperatures. Yeah, the waters are colder here, but they're warmer compared to what they were. There's a couple little pockets of cooling, but the balance here is almost warming. Interesting. La Nina just doesn't seem to really be there. That said, sea surface temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region, that area right there by Ecuador, well, it's down, what are we, minus 1.244 degrees right there. But in general, we've been hovering about 3/4 of a degree below normal, other than this last spike in the past week and a half. The official El Nino region, the Nino 3.4 region on the equator, 5 degrees north of and south of the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, from a point south of California out to the date line. Temperatures today, 3/4 of a degree below normal, minus 757 thousandths of a degree. But you can see, to even be La Nina, you have to be at minus half a degree for 5 consecutive months. And we've been there for 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks officially. Okay. Not really a significant trend. The forecast for Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies from the CFS version 2 model, the official PDF corrected version, has temperatures dipping, not even getting, well, just now getting below normal. This week's average temperature was half a degree below normal. The first week in, well, since El Nino. And it's forecast to go down to theoretically 1 degree in December. We looked at all the other models last week, the consensus model. They all say maybe 3/4 of a degree. So the fundamentals of this La Nina are exceedingly weak. Let's go look at one other thing, the thing that I was talking about earlier that's really very interesting. This is from the CFS version 2 model, equatorial temperature, subsurface temperature forecast. So here we are in October, and it's just, this is the Pacific, starts here at about 125 east, 120 east, and ends at Ecuador at about 80 west. There's our La Nina cool pool, continuing into November, December. But notice, as you get into December, warm water, almost, I gotta say, almost looks like a Kelvin wave forecast starting to build in December, into January, February, and the cool pool in the east getting cooler and all but gone by March, with warm water moving into the East Pacific. By April, May, and June, a warm water regime taking over, La Nina all but gone. This model is suggesting literally a 1-year La Nina, a 1 winter La Nina, and at that, it's all effectively gone by as you get into mid-March. All right, so let's pull out of the weeds for just a second. The good news is the cap on storm development appears to finally be broken. The North Pacific coming online, sure, not gangbusters, it's nothing epic, but there at least is some activity. The South Pacific coming online as well. Swell bound in for Hawaii and California, nothing huge. Another one behind that, and potentially another behind that. That said, the seasons appeared to be delayed by about 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. So here we are, almost October. We're still like we're in summer, and it doesn't, even in the Sierra, temperatures are not showing this big downward plunge. Again, supporting this idea that the seasons are a bit offset, and we're just going to have to live through it, unfortunately. But maybe we'll get a taste of summer as in the end result. The Atlantic, hurricane activity fully in play again, not as forecast, but at least providing some hope. And then beyond that, well, we're hoping the North Pacific is really going to come online. We'll be back into some sort of a semi-normal pattern as we get deeper into October. Longer term than that, this La Nina thing, at least the way it looks now, is kind of a bust. We do know that the PDO is supporting this long-running high-pressure regime over the North Pacific, and that also is over the South Pacific as well. The question is, are we reaching a point where that has maybe run its course and is going to start fading out? It's been in place for 25 years now, or close to it. So maybe, just maybe, I don't know. Too early to know. The models won't know for sure. I don't know of any real legit PDO model that forecasts what's happening. The best we can do is use the MJO, the El Nino, and the La Nina models to sort of tease out what's coming. But it wouldn't be surprising if we were on the verge of a shift sometime soon. At least for the short term, the La Nina pattern looks like it's going to be very weak this winter and might only last one winter long. That would be great news. So we'll just have to keep monitoring and see how this plays out. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. Questions or concerns, write them up down below. We'd be happy to answer. If you haven't subscribed, click the Stormsurf icon down on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Get yourself signed up for automatic notifications when the videos are posted. And of course, if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you may hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with a $sign in it. And with that, we are done for this week. We'll do it again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks for hanging with us a little bit extra tonight, and we'll see you next week.